Okay, get ready because, wow, you guys really sent in a doozy this time. Like, seriously, the twist ending of M. Night Shyamalan's next movie's got nothing on this one.
We're talking historical mysteries, shocking claims, and let's just say you might want to buckle up because we are diving into a whole new perspective on something I think we all thought we knew pretty well.
So, remember the Titanic? I mean, who could forget? The unsinkable ship, the iceberg, the tragic, just devastating loss of life. It's one of those stories that just stays with you, you know?
But have you heard the one about the real reason the Titanic sank? And get this, it's not about icebergs or design flaws.
Nope. According to this research paper someone sent in, and you guys know I love a good research paper to buy an intervention, sent that ship to the bottom of the ocean.
And are you ready for this? It gets even better.
The title of this paper, get this, The True Cause of the Titanic Tragedy.
Yeah.
A Vatican Revelation. A Vatican Revelation. I mean, come on. How could we not dive into this?
So these researchers, and I'm using that term loosely here, claim it was a fabulous gay-only cruise. Their words, not mine.
Apparently, this was all spelled out in some ancient religious text. And where did they find these incredibly convenient texts? Oh, just casually hanging out at the wreck site. But, and there's always a but, isn't there?
They're far, far too fragile to be seen or photographed. Too fragile, really.
It's like finding a winning lottery ticket, but it's like printed on tissue paper and disintegrates if you try to show it to anyone.
And it gets better, or should I say, more unbelievable. These researchers, who, by the way, don't seem to have any actual credentials or affiliations, just kind of throw out this idea that all the passengers being gay is just a given, a fact so obvious it needs no historical backing whatsoever.
Like they just expect us to take their word for it. Oh, and that tiny little detail about the complete lack of, evidence. Well, that's just proof of how good these folks were at hiding their, and I quote, unnatural affection and grievous sin. Give me a break.
I mean, even my cat brings me photographic evidence when she pushes a glass off the counter. She is not subtle.
Okay. Okay, so maybe, just maybe, we're dealing with some creative interpretations of history here, just a tad.
But before we go full speed ahead into why this theory is making me want to facepalm so hard, let's take a step back to, reality, shall we? To the actual, evidence-based history of the Titanic.
The stuff that doesn't require us to suspend all logic and reason.
Here to help us navigate these, let's call them choppy waters, I've got our expert with us.
Can you remind us what we actually know about the Titanic sinking? Decades of research, meticulous analysis of the ship's design, the events of that night. What does all that point to?
Well, it all points to human error, design flaws, and the environment, right? Traveling too fast in dangerous waters was a big one. Then there was the whole watertight compartments thing. Turns out they weren't as watertight as they should have been. And of course, you can't forget the iceberg itself. That's a pretty big environmental factor no matter how you look at it. And we're not just talking about theories here. We're talking about hard evidence, eyewitness accounts, and some very rigorous scientific investigation.
Right. I mean, they're so meticulous. It's like they list out everything but the passenger's favorite ice cream flavor. You'd think someone would have at least jotted down. I'm like, oh, by the way, this is a fabulous gay-only cruise in the margin somewhere.
Okay, so we've got actual history, evidence, and common sense on one hand, and then we have this Vatican revelation on the other.
And it just goes to show, it's like this whole thing is a giant flashing neon sign about confirmation bias. I mean, someone out there, you, dear listener, you sent this in, and I know you're not alone, right? Something about this theory must pique your interest. So what was it? What caught your eye?
We've all been there, haven't we? We see that headline. It's like, boom, it confirms all our suspicions. And suddenly we're ready to sign up, join the movement, buy the T-shirt without even, skimming the article, let alone reading it.
It's like our brains are hardwired to be drawn to anything that says, see, we were right all along.
But, and this is a big but, confirmation bias can take us down some pretty weird, twisty, and sometimes even dangerous paths. This Titanic theory, this is a perfect example.
Yeah, no, it's really something. It's like they're trying so hard to make history fit their narrative, Like they even bring up Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh, yeah, they throw Sodom and Gomorrah in there as if that explains everything, as if that's the ultimate mic drop. It sank because it was full of sinners, just like Sodom and Gomorrah.
But come on, that's like History 101 stuff. People have been using Sodom and Gomorrah to explain away tragedies since, well, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time, unfortunately. Blaming tragedies on, divine anger, or the sins of a certain group of people. It's a pattern that just keeps repeating.
We see it everywhere in history. I mean, think about the Black Death back in medieval Europe.
Yeah.
Talk about a devastating pandemic. And since they didn't have science to explain it, people started pointing fingers. Divine punishment. The wrath of God.
And you know who got caught in the crosshairs, don't you?
Marginalized communities. They always do. Back then, it was Jewish communities who were blamed and persecuted, all because people needed someone to blame, some way to make sense of the chaos.
It's scary how easily people can jump to conclusions like that. Especially when there's fear and uncertainty in the air. It's like they need a scapegoat, like someone has to be to blame so the world makes sense again.
It's about finding an easy answer, right? Even if that answer is completely wrong.
Mm.
And especially when it confirms their existing biases. Like we were saying, they see what they want to see. And often what they want to see is a reason to blame someone else.
Which brings us right back to our favorite Vatican revelation. Because let's be real, this isn't really about the Titanic, is it? They're not just presenting a new theory, they're pushing a narrative. And that narrative has real-world consequences.
And this is where things get dangerous. We can't just accept these claims without evidence. Basing our beliefs on some vague interpretation of divine will or ancient texts without any real proof, that's how you end up justifying some pretty harmful ideologies.
Exactly. It's like this research paper with its ancient texts and conveniently invisible evidence. It's not about truth. It's about using history to push a specific viewpoint, and that's scary stuff.
Because if we're not careful, history has a way of repeating itself.
Okay, so to recap this paper, total BS.
But it's a perfect example of why we need to be thinking critically about, well, everything, especially when it comes to history.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the patterns, understanding why people gravitate towards these kinds of explanations and being wary of anyone who's trying to use history to push their own agenda.
Because the truth is out there, but
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a little digging to find it.
So how do we do that? How do we sift through all the noise and find the actual truth? It's not easy, that's for sure.
It's about being, well, I guess you could say, an active participant in the information you consume. Don't just take it at face value. Question everything. Who's telling you this? What's their angle? And what does the evidence say? Does it actually hold up under scrutiny? Or is it just a house of cards?
It's like being a detective, right? You don't just look for clues that fit your theory. You have to consider everything. You follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it's not where you expected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means being willing to admit you were wrong, to change your mind when the evidence tells a different story.
Yeah, but that's not easy. I mean, who likes to admit they were wrong?
No one. But it's way better to acknowledge it and learn from it than to stick your head in the sand and ignore the truth.
Well said. I mean, the only thing constant is change, right? And that includes our own opinions and beliefs when we learn something new.
Speaking of which, let's give a final nod to this Vatican revelation of ours.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had some laughs, raised some eyebrows, but really, this whole thing, it highlights something really important about history.
This isn't just about one wacky theory. It's about seeing the bigger picture, recognizing these thought patterns, these dangerous ways of thinking that have been around for centuries.
We have to be wary of anyone who tries to twist history to fit their agenda. And that's what this feels like, right? This research paper with its ancient texts and its magically invisible evidence, that's not about truth. It's about pushing a specific viewpoint. And that's something we always have to be on the lookout for.
Because history has a way of repeating itself if we're not careful.
Well, on that cheery note, I want to thank our listener who sent in this, shall we say, unique piece of research. You definitely gave us a deep dive to remember.
It sparked an important conversation, and that's what we're all about, right? Getting people thinking, asking questions, and maybe even challenging their own assumptions along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to all our listeners, keep those questions coming. Who knows what we'll dive into next?
But until then, keep those BS detectors switched on, question everything, and don't be afraid to change your mind when the evidence demands it. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.